Hello, I'm Greg Hunter. Thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. I have back today one of my favorites, Karl Denninger. He is at market-ticker.org. Karl Denninger, you are a writer, you're an investor, you are an analyst, and we're here to talk today about the fiscal cliff. Deal or no deal? Karl?
Well, no deal, but I've said no deal since before Thanksgiving. In fact, when I handicapped it back then, I said there was about a 70% chance that they weren't going to come up with anything. And if they did come up with something, it would be a BS proposal that didn't actually solve the problem. So, and that's just simply based on the fact that you have a political class that both has an incentive to see this thing explode in their face. And so you have Obama on the one side that wants higher taxes, and if he does nothing, he gets higher taxes. And you have the politicians on the Republican side that want lower spending, and if we do nothing, they get lower spending. So the other side of this, though, and the funny dynamic with it is that you've got Norquist, who, of course, is a self-stylized deficit hawk. His deficit hawkishness, by the way, has led to ramping deficits for the last 4 years. His so-called fiscal hawkishness has only come on one side, which is taxation. And the problem with doing that, of course, is that if you try to do this as a person, you find out that you can't spend more than you take in for an extended period of time. But, Grover has his threats and his promises to oppose people and things like this. And so he's backed a large number of the Republican Party into a corner. And essentially, what you saw with Boehner's negotiations is that the caucus revolted on him, and he was forced to pull his Plan B bill off the floor because he couldn't get the votes.
And they don't say anything about this $40 billion a month banker bailout. They don't say anything about the $45 billion a month they're using to buy treasuries. Bloomberg reported that the Fed's buying 90% of the government debt. Ooh, Mom, not a word about any of that. I mean, you said it in one of your posts.
Yeah, that's $85 billion a month that the Federal Reserve is putting into the system for the explicit purpose of enabling deficit spending. Okay, that's why it's going on, because both sides of the aisle want to spend more than they take in taxes. They want to make promises to the American people, as they have done for the last 30 years, that they know full well they cannot pay for. And rather than admit that they've lied to you, I, everybody else, no matter what the topic, I don't care if it's entitlement spending, defense, energy, education, doesn't make any difference, rather than tell the American public, we lied. We misrepresented this to you. We did it on purpose for political reasons because we wanted to get elected. We told you we could give you something for free. This was not the truth. Now you either have to pay or not get it. Rather than do that, they go to Bernanke and essentially club him over the head and say the end of the world will ensue unless you make it possible for this to continue. But what nobody wants to talk about is that when you debase the currency in this kind of fashion, there is no such thing as a free lunch. So, yeah, the government runs its deficits, but gasoline prices double. And the price of milk goes from $2 to $4 a gallon. And then everyone says, oh, why do we have such high unemployment? Why aren't we recovering from this recession? And the answer is, you're not recovering from the recession because you're still trying to maintain economic demand at a level that is above that which the economy can support. And until you stop doing that, there's going to be a recovery.
Recently you said last week that, that we'd have 50 points on the S&P drop if we don't get the fiscal cliff deal, or 300 points on the Dow. This is serious stuff, right?
Well, sure, it's serious stuff. But look, Thursday night, Boehner, he did not have the votes, and he pulled his bill, okay? And you got 50 points on the S&P futures that came off in 2 minutes. So it isn't that we go off the cliff and we lose 50 points on the S&P and 300 points on the Dow. We lost 300 points on the Dow and 50 points on the S&P. Yeah, some of it came back, but that reaction, we didn't even get to the point that the cliff actually occurred yet. And
you predicted that. Reaction. That's a good prediction.
Yeah, so here's the reality, is that the market is expecting that the government is going to continue to make promises and promote a level of demand in the economy, and therefore asset prices, i.e. stocks, that is not reflected by what people actually earn. As soon as anyone questions this, as what happened with Boehner, oops, off comes 300 points. That's the beginning of this, not the end of it. You could see 3,000 Dow points come off in the space of a couple of months. But the best thing that we could do as an economy right now, from an economic perspective, is to go straight off the cliff and not come back. Stay off, because that would take about half of the deficit off the table immediately. The interesting thing about the way that this gets split up is that about $220 billion of that $600 billion that would come is from the expiration of the payroll tax cut, which is the worst thing that they could have possibly done. When they were trying to stimulate the economy, what they did was essentially take Social Security, which was almost okay. It was fixable with minor changes, and was, even without them, was okay until 2039, and pulled forward that date. What people do not understand about Social Security is that under the law, it is illegal for the trustees to send out checks that cannot be backed with current tax revenues. What that payroll tax cut will do, if it is extended, and it should not be, is it will take that date and pull it forward to about 2019. So by the end of this decade, less than 6-7 years from now, everyone who is on Social Security is going to see 30% of their benefits go away. Now, that's a huge number, okay? But that is what's going to happen. And if you embed this payroll tax cut into the system for another couple of years, there won't be any way to stop it, no matter what you do, because you have to make that revenue back up. And we have already put about a $600 billion deficit into that system that will have to come back out. So this is an extraordinarily destructive change that was made in the law. It needs to go away right now. And the rest of it we can talk about, we can figure out ways to fix. But that payroll tax cut is, at the time it was passed, they said this is the worst possible thing you can do in terms of deficit spending, because it is going to screw senior citizens with absolute certainty in less than 10 years. And yet they did it anyway, and now we still have, Pelosi and the Democrat car. Oh, we can't change Social Security. Well, guess what? You guys did change Social Security with an absolute certainty in a very short time frame.
So you think the best thing we should do right now is Thelma and Louise it. Hold hands, push the pedal to the metal, go on over.
Just go home. Pass nothing. Go home. Look, my taxes will go up. Nobody wants that, okay? I don't want to pay higher taxes. I'm sure you don't want to pay higher taxes. Nobody wants to pay higher taxes. The one thing that they should fix, and they can fix very easily, is the AMT. That should be permanently fixed. That has to be fixed by the 31st of December, or it is going to hammer tens of millions of middle-class Americans that have never had to pay it before. We're talking about people who make $40,000 and $50,000 a year. We're not talking about, people like in my tax bracket. We're talking about people in middle-class tax brackets. And the worst places where it will hit people are in states that have very high state tax burdens, because it disallows deductions. So what's going to happen is, if you pay a high state income tax, let's say you live in New York or California, somewhere else where you have a high state income tax, or where you have a high state property tax, when you go over that AMT threshold, those deductions that you normally can take against federal income become disallowed. You have to compute both, and whichever one's the higher is the one you pay. So you're going to see people that have never been subject to this before. I've had to pay it several times, okay? But you're going to see people that have never been subject to this before all of a sudden get hit with $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 worth of unexpected taxes.
Prediction, do we get a deal by December 31st, January 1st for the fiscal cliff?
No. We might get an AMT patch. We should get an AMT patch. There is no incentive on either side of the aisle, and there is a time problem, because under Senate rules you need 3 legislative days before you can vote after the bill has been published and reported out. And that is essentially impossible right now. They come back from Christmas break. The session would be gavelled back in on Thursday, okay? And so you'd have Thursday to read a bill, Friday, no business Saturday, no business Sunday. You could vote Monday. Of course, Monday's that's it, right? And then you potentially could go to the 2nd, which is legally the last day of the session. So, there's but there's essentially no more maneuvering time. You need to have legislative language drafted on the floor that can be voted on, sent over to the Senate, and it has to happen the day after Christmas because otherwise it isn't going to happen.
Well, so your prediction, no deal on the AMT. I mean, no deal on the fiscal cliff.
No deal on the fiscal cliff, maybe a patch on the AMT, which should have been done. If it isn't, by the way, there will be no tax refunds that go out to anybody until May or June.
That's going to be good for the economy.
If you are in a position where you currently you file early and get a tax refund in January, February, March, forget it, because the IRS cannot process returns until they know what the rate is on those AMT returns. And they can't do those computations, nor can the software providers, the TurboTax people, everybody else, until they know how this is resolved. So if we don't have a patch, at least for the AMT, because the rest is all next year's taxes, okay? But the AMT is this year's taxes, 2012 taxes. If we don't have a patch for that, then there will be no tax refunds that go out until a month or two after that change has been fixed.
Karl Denninger, market-ticker.org. Thank you so much for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you.